the word of these lawsuits spills out into society, enters into the national conversation, and people start thinking that this is the appropriate way to live. And
Roger Connor, founder of the American Alliance for Rights and Responsibility, says these lawsuits send the wrong message.
It makes people think I'd be a chump if I did otherwise. If I take responsibility for what I do and for what happens to me, I'm a fool. Now, when that idea gets loose, America's in trouble.
It's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's not my fault.
A few years ago, Connor quit his law practice and started a group that would try to show people that a better way to solve problems is not to blame others, but to take responsibility ourselves.
All righty, let's hit the street.
To fight crime near his house in Washington, D.C., he helped form a neighborhood watch group. They call themselves the Orange Cap Patrol.
Nice to see you.
On random nights, they stand guard on street corners to discourage the drug trade. It's made a difference. The residents feel they've regained control of their neighborhood. Connor says Americans should do more of this, and less blaming, less suing, less demanding that others take care of us.
This whole victimization, it's like a disease that's weakening America's moral fiber. Living consists of encountering the weaknesses, the failings that we all have as individual human beings, and the problems that inevitably enter our lives. And dealing with those, that's the stuff of life.
On the other hand, we don't want to move back to the jungle, do we? Modern civilization offers useful protections. Traffic lights, seat belts, warnings on explosives. These are good things. But how far do we want to go? Must you be warned, for example, not to ride a bike at night?
Yes, says this bike accident lawyer. His client is Colin Johnson, who was paralyzed after his bike collided with a Jeep. But Colin was riding at night without a light. So who was responsible for the accident? Not the driver of the Jeep, and not Colin, says the lawyer. Colin was victimized by the company that made the bike because there was no label that said, don't ride at night without a light.
Colin didn't know that he needed a light. There's a reflector system on the bicycle, which most people apparently are misled into thinking is adequate for night riding.
He convinced a jury to order the bike company to pay him and his client $7 million.
And you have to be told that it's dangerous to ride at night?
Without a light and with reflectors? Yeah.
So shouldn't there also be a label on the bike that says, going downhill, it'll go faster?
There's no need to warn about obvious dangers.
He wasn't at all responsible for what happened to him?
Not at all.
None of it?
Not a bit.
Where we're headed is the notion that I never have to insure myself, protect myself, take responsibility for myself, plan for myself, because there'll always be someone there to pick up the pieces. You can make demands upon the society, give me my rights. And now everybody has rights, nobody has responsibilities, and our society ain't going to work.
It's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's not my fault.
We took an informal survey on a commuter train to determine just how many of these people qualify as members of protected classes, entitled to those special protections under the civil rights laws. It turns out most did. After all, women are covered, so are minorities and people over 40. Of the 237 people who answered our survey, only 30 younger white men turned out not to have special protection. And lots of the people said they'd been victims of discrimination. Less than 1% of the workforce files formal complaints, but the number is growing. Over the last 10 years, 700,000 discrimination claims have been filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Everybody's a victim. Whatever happened to personal responsibility and people trying to get ahead and build a life for themselves? That's what I'm trying to do.
Tama Starr runs a business that makes neon signs. Signs like these that light up New York's Times Square. She employs about 90 people, all races, many nationalities. Over the years, she's fired some and been sued. Once, after laying off a man who'd been absent or late 300 out of 400 consecutive workdays.
He came back and said, hey, I'm a Honduran. You've got discrimination against Hondurans. I said, you're not a Honduran. You're an absent and late guy.
She won the lawsuit.
I always win, but every single lawsuit costs $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. to defend.
Starr was one of the few company bosses willing to talk about being sued by employees. The editor of Inc. magazine says most executives are terrified that publicity will invite more suits. Privately, they tell him, they usually settle and pay even when they're in the right.
So what? Companies are rich. They can afford it.
But they can't. That's the great American illusion. Government can afford it. Business can afford it. You know who pays for all this? The American consumer, the typical American employee. We pay for it.
We pay not just a few extra dollars on things we buy, but we also pay in lost jobs. Because when employers fear lawsuits, some stop hiring.
One is scared to hire. On the one hand, you say, oh, good, that person will help me meet my quota of people in the category. And with your other brain, you say, oh, bad, because that person might sue me if things don't work out on the job. Both ways are bad because that's racist thinking.
Recently, activists argued that the disabled should have a law, too. Companies should be ordered to provide wheelchair ramps and other things to give the disabled equal access to work and life. Congress agreed and passed the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It makes it illegal to discriminate against people with disabilities and requires employers when hiring to make reasonable accommodation to the disabled. One goal was to help people like Mark Simidian get into the working world. It's not easy for Mark to get to work. Mark's commute from New York City to the suburbs takes more than an hour, but he doesn't mind. Prospective employers have sometimes asked him, how would you get to work? He tells them that's not their business.
Because that's the way I am. I don't want to make excuses for myself. I don't want to put up walls or barriers that are going to get in my way.
No, usually we run a special. We had our last...
Mark's new job is taking flight reservations for people who call Northwest Airlines' 800 number.
Okay, I'll take that.
This braille device allows him to feel what other agents see.
There's a 2:50 flight this afternoon.
Now, Mark says it's by no means clear that the ADA got him this job. He's had jobs before. Still, the ADA may have helped. Who knows if Northwest Airlines would have spent the extra $4,000 to install this equipment and give Mark special training. The investment paid off, though. In just 2 months, Mark's become one of the office's top ticket sellers.
I'm just one more example of where a company can very proudly say, well, yes, you know, we've hired a person with a disability, and guess what? They've done just fine.
A company gets a good worker, Mark gets a good job. Just what backers of the ADA envisioned. And they say most employers don't even have to spend $1,000 to accommodate disabled employees.
It's a nice story, but there's another side to the ADA we hear less about. This is a powerful law. Its backers say it affects 43 million Americans. That's 1 in 6 of us, but it may be even more people because what exactly is a disability? The law specifically excludes a few potential victims like kleptomaniacs and compulsive gamblers, but beyond that, the definition is vague. Is being stupid a disability? How about being late? And what is a reasonable accommodation? Laws this vague invite so-called victims to be inventive. Lawyers who feed off such ambiguities can argue about these questions endlessly, and they do. One man sued GTE because they fired him for carrying a gun to work, a loaded gun.
The man's suit says he can't legally be fired because his disability caused him to carry the gun. His disability? A chemical imbalance which caused psychiatric problems. All the more reason, I'd think, not to have him hanging around the office with a gun. This man, David Shaw, superintendent of schools in Hamden, Connecticut, was caught driving drunk. He'd been caught once before, but this time he was driving drunk, dressed in women's clothing. Not a great role model for the kids, thought the school board, but before they could fire him, Shaw filed a lawsuit saying he was protected by the ADA because he's in treatment for alcoholism. Rather than fight the suit, the board voted to pay Shaw $240,000, give him medical benefits, and pay him a pension for the rest of his life. The board figured it had to settle, because fighting an ADA case would have cost the taxpayers more. Cases like those hurt the very people the law was designed to help, says Roger Connor.
The Americans with Disabilities Act started as real help to real victims. Now you've got people that are afraid of moving trains, people that are afraid of slow trains, all of them claiming victim status, and all of them claiming the right for somebody to come in and take care of them or give them an award in some way because they're quote-unquote disabled.